Mark, Richard, I'm just so spiffy. I got my first COVID shot and get another one in 2 weeks. So I'm hoping that everybody will survive this. The furthest we've gone anywhere was we went up to Magic Mountain, which is where the vaccination center was. We got in the queue there. It was really very efficient. They didn't waste any of our time, and I thought they did a superb job. And then we went over and we bought some beef ribs and came home and had a feast. So that's not exactly an exciting life, I don't think, but it's probably fairly typical of a lot of people these days. I know. For lunch, I go to In-N-Out Burger sometime, and now at least you can sit outside again, which was good. But that's, I've got, my car will be 5 years old in April 22nd, I think it is, and I don't even have 16,000 miles on it. My first car, I had 67,500 miles on it in just a little over 2 years. So quite a difference the times make. It's it's dying of neglect. Battery, yeah. Well, this is going to be quite an adventure here because I got thrown into this sort of at the last minute, and the first class I ever taught in this department was called microcomputer architecture, which at that time we had none of the tools that we have today. So this is going to be an exciting learning experience for everybody. We have a couple labs set up for this week, and the first one, I think, which we'll do on Wednesday, is I think pretty much in line with what I think the students will be hoping to learn in the class. And if you remember Dina from our 116 class, she wants to get in, so I sent her a link. I don't know if I don't see her name up here yet, but she may have joined us just to join the frivolity here. Oh, at times. The lab that you're going to do on Wednesday is essentially in assembly language, but you don't have to be terribly creative because we're going to use a program that is an emulation that whatever don't remember the author's name, and it allows you to. It has a sort of a pseudo screen, and you can draw pixels in there. And basically, you're going to learn how to write a few little code segments that look like assembly code, although the heart of it is totally hidden from the user, and manipulate some pixels. And then you're going to create your own font. So, for instance, if your last name begins with the letter V, you have to create a font. And what I've asked the students to do, the window, by the way, is 32 by 32. I should say the frame is 32 by 32. So students are asked to create basically a replica of their last name in that window, at least 17 pixels high. And so I'll demonstrate that on Wednesday. And then, of course, next Monday is the school holiday. So we'll have a little bit of a lecture on Wednesday of that week, but mostly it'll be the lab. Now, the lab for next week will involve going back to some stuff that we didn't do. We should have done in 116. dealing with looking at the binary values of words, how to manipulate them with some logical construct like and, or, not, left shift, right shift, stuff like that. All of these are operations that we will do down at the assembly language level as the time goes on. And in fact, if you get into the like the middle part of chapter 2 of the Sci books, they actually get into talking about stuff like that. So we'll learn about the different kinds of shifts. You can have a logical shift, you can have an arithmetic shift. It all depends upon how the carry in and carry out are handled. And we never covered any of that kind of stuff in 116. So that'll be new stuff to us, but we'll be doing it at a basically at an assembly language level. Well, I don't know. We'll see. Hope everybody stays awake. Paint. It's only got the palette has only got 16 colors, but so you have to pick your favorite. Unfortunately, my favorite, which is red, is really in there. If you look at the palette that's available, one of the things you can do in the lab is creating a palette of colors. But if there's only 16 colors, you'll notice in there that there's really not a red that I would like. So I have no idea why. So for my font, I chose purple. I guess it's purple. I'm sort of colorblind, so I would call it purple. Anyway, we got another, we're just about ready. I see a lot of names on here that I do not recognize. We have 42 enrolled, and I know that there are people that want to have. It's interesting looking at the pictures that people put up representing themselves. Okay, just about there. So, good morning, class. I see some names up here that I don't recognize. I see a couple that I do recognize from the Saturday class, CS116, that we just completed, or hopefully we've completed. I still have a few scofflaws that haven't. I can't tell who that is, but I've never had that happen before, but I guess it's surprising. Anyway, good morning. I am Professor Sterling, and you should have received some emails from me over the past few days. If you look on Zoom, pardon me, on Canvas, you should see a number of documents that are posted. This is Computer Science CS130. I was asked at the last minute to substitute. There was some stuff going on behind the scenes that nobody would explain to me. So I'm a little bit into the mystery side of things. But we'll give it a go here. I'm trying to coordinate material with Mr. O'Neill, and he's taught this class quite a bit. And also Hank Murphy, who has also taught this class. I think we'll keep the classes sort of in sync with one another. So I think the first thing we need to do is to go through, and it's the obligation that we have to go through the syllabus here. Come on, wake up. This is sort of obligatory. I cobbled this together from my CS116, and there's a few holes in it. I don't know exactly how all the assignments are going to flow through the entire semester, so I know at least where we're going to start. So as the semester goes on, you should keep an eye out for changes. I'll try to announce them in the class, but this is the first cut at it. I am not quite sure how the grading is going to stack up, so I labeled it here tentative. The most important thing, I think, to get started is the textbook is an electronic textbook called Zybooks, Zybooks. And if you go onto the site for them, a few days ago, I noticed, or one of the students pointed out to me that it didn't have our class listed. I went in and I edited that, and I think it's corrected. Nobody has told me it isn't. So you should see our section and now listed in there. The Zybooks is something you need to have. The lecture material will cover a lot of what's in there. There will be supplemental documents. Unfortunately, you're going to be inundated with supplemental documents as the semester goes on, and these will be posted on Canvas. One thing I would like you to remember is that the way this class is listed in the catalog, the same way that CS116 was listed, there's two entirely different sections, even though you really only get a grade for one. What does that mean? Well, anything relating to the lecture, I will post into the 20751 section. Anything related to the lab, I will post into this 20752. So if you look on the Canvas bulletin board right now, you'll find on the section for the lab, you'll find two lab postings, both of which begin with the letters PP. PP stands for password protected. Why do I do that? Well, basically, if you were coming to class, you would get a pass out for the lab for each week. So basically, it's the same thing. If you come to class on Wednesday, this week, Wednesday, next week, whatever, you'll be able to access the lab because I will give you the password for that. Same thing will be done with tests and quizzes and stuff like that. So no big deal. As far as Zybooks is concerned, it's important that I'm going to go through step by step how to do that. It's important that you get that textbook. I'm still mulling over whether or not to assign a grade to the they call them participation activities that are in the Zybooks. I'm not sure how many of the students in this class have ever used Zybooks before, but they have several different sections in there that pop up actually quite frequently. One is called a participation activity. And when you do that as a student, it goes back to their server and gets all accumulated. And then I get a report that tells me, what work you've done and what work you haven't done. Now, some of the instructors grade that religiously, some don't. I chose not to for CS116 because I felt that the material that we're doing in the lab and other stuff was far more important. And also the way the Zybooks people organize it, it's just really an awful mess trying to extract exactly what you want out of there. So that's up in the air. That's very, very tentative right now. But nevertheless, I really recommend you do that because the way it works, you read a section and then there'll be some questions asked. And if you have read the section and you've digested it, you should be able to answer the questions. If not, you may have to go back and rereading. So it's basically prompting you along the way to learn. And I think it's a pretty good idea. I disagree with occasionally with some of their answers or some of the statements that they make, but that's just how things are. So be sure to get your Zybooks account. Since we are going to be doing this all remotely, you probably don't need a flash drive. I recommended that for students when we were actually working in the lab, because if you were in one of our two labs on campus, any work you did, if you went away, you could not count on it being there because sometimes the technicians update the system where people come in and they will steal your work or they'll erase your work, whatever. So that's why a flash drive was required. Here, I put it on here, but I don't think it is normally very, very necessary. Again, look for postings on Canvas. You will be informed during the lecture most of the time, but not always, about stuff that's been added on there. Anything that you need to refer to, I will talk about in the lecture, but just consider that sort of your second assignment. Every student who is enrolled in the class should have received an email from me saying basically your first assignment is read the syllabus, and then send me an email saying I read the syllabus and I am attending the class. Otherwise, I really don't know who's in the class. We have people on the waiting list. We have 42 students currently enrolled, not all of whom will show up. And I haven't looked yet this morning, but I should have been provided by the administration what are called permission numbers. Permission numbers basically are numbers that I would provide each of the students that wants to add, and this should allow them to add. So after the lecture today, any student that is linked into this that can contact me, let me know and I will provide you a permission number. There's really, because there's no hardware limitations here, there's no fire law issue, I can basically add as many students as want to. But the students who are enrolled that are not attending, I'm just going to drop because it's just annoying to have to deal with that. Okay, what are we going to be doing in this class? Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be starting off with some background material that's provided in the reading material in SciBooks. And then we're going to start getting more and more down into the lower levels of how you program. And in the CS116, which is a prerequisite for this, you're programming at a relatively high level. You have a family of constructs that are provided to you as part of a compiler. I don't know whether you used repl.it or use Visual Studio. Either way, basically you're able to do the same things. And somehow, by some magical process, a set of code is generated that the microprocessor understands and will do your bidding. But we're going to be writing down at a level, not at the very, very bottom level, but we're going to be writing at a lower level called the assembly language level, where you're going to be writing constructs that will ultimately be able to be translated into what's called true machine language. If you read the contents, like for instance, if you were open up an executable file and you were to look at it with a text editor like Notepad, whatever, it would make absolutely no sense whatsoever. However, if you could look at one of your programs you created at an assembly level, you would see things that are written in English that little by little you will start to understand. And the contents of that will really be processor dependent. And we're going to be working with a number, I'm not sure what Mr. O'Neill has decided as to how many different processes we're going to be looking at. The one that you're going to be dealing with on Wednesday's lab, although you're not really going to truly be creating assembly language code, is the old 6502, which goes back many, many years. But it's very, very instructive in terms of some of the constructs you have. You'll see some of the statements that you write that are not terribly untypical of what you'll be doing with almost any processor. There's certain fundamental operations, add, subtract, compare, shift left, shift right, things like that are pretty much common to any processor. And therefore, there would be language constructs that would be supported by that would be very similar in no matter what processor you're dealing with. Okay, so grading is sort of up in the air. You will have lab assignments and you will have, right now, tentatively, 2 midterms and a final exam. Everybody, by policy of the school, have to have a final. I don't know what date the final's on. The list of dates for the final is very, very vague right now. It could be on Wednesday, but because Monday, the end of May, is a holiday, it would slip into June. And so we'll see how it works out. I don't know the answer to that. If you look on the syllabus, you'll see that it's sort of questionable when it will be. Okay. You're going to be writing a number of programs that you will submit. Normally, you're going to be submitting the code that you generating whatever. In Wednesday's lab of this week, you're going to be generating what sort of looks like assembly language code. It doesn't require you to really know anything ahead of time. And that's part of what you're going to be submitting to me. You're also asked to create what's called a screenshot. And I'm not sure how many students know how to do that. We'll talk about that on Wednesday. But basically, a screenshot, sometimes called a screen capture, basically what you're looking at on your monitor is a group of picture elements called pixels. And that is mathematically described, and you can capture it as a file, which is basically what they call a bitmap file. You can capture that file, and in the editor that's provided, I'll see if I can make this window pop up. I don't know if you can see this. That's not popping up. Anyway, they call Paintbrush. Paintbrush allows you to basically go in and cut and paste out of that the portion that you want. So you're going to be asked to send me screenshots from several different things you're going to be doing, which is basically manipulating pixels. You're going to create a color palette, and then you're going to create your own font, which will be the initial, whatever initial you choose to use of your last name. And that font basically is just a group of pixels arranged in some pattern that we would recognize as an English letter. If you put it in some other language, I'm in trouble because I can't read Asian, for instance, writing, whatever. I never really tried. So you'll have a number of assignments like that. And I wrote down here, let me highlight this. I got the wrong mode here. Basically, if you're in this class, I hope you're here to learn. So the work that you submit, I hope it reflects your accomplishments. You copy somebody, and there's no way to stop that, so I don't even try. If you copy somebody, you really have wasted your time in the class because you walk away and you won't have picked up nearly as much as you should have. If you're in trouble, there are tutors that are available, and that can be arranged through Canvas, I believe. And excuse me, just a second. I have a feeling that was a student who's not supposed to call during lecture time here, so I just muted it. Anyway, if you're in the class, I hope you're here to learn. And if you have trouble, if you're getting behind, whatever, and you need help, there are tutors that are available, Mr. Murphy. I'm not quite sure who else will be provided for you. I don't know what the palette of support will be. That hasn't been established yet. And I provide, you can contact me via text if you need to contact me fairly quickly. If you have a family emergency, and I'm in a real emergency, you can call my phone number on my house, but I don't like you to do it during the lecture, obviously. And text messages I generally can respond to fairly quickly. You can also email me. Because of the clutter that's involved in the Pierce College email that I have, I just get dozens of emails every week, most of which are just not terribly interesting or important. I don't know why they get sent to me. And to try to ferret out an email from a student out of that mess has become virtually impossible. So I've created an account with Google Gmail that I would like you to use for any communications. Anything that you submit, send it to my Gmail account. And if you have questions, you can contact me that way. I think that'll work out fairly well. We've done that for several semesters now, and that's what I'd like you to do. Student learning outcomes: create and understand assembly language programs on simulated platform or platforms, including the use of opcode, selection, iteration, and functions, runtime stack, and various addressing modes. That's sort of our goal. That's a fairly broad brush, and we'll try to do it simulating on several different processors. I'm not quite sure which ones Mr. O'Neill wants to do, but that's probably what we'll choose to do. If you're attending, I will know that by looking at the Zoom report. At the end of the class, I download a report from Zoom and tells me who's attending. If I see that you're not attending for 2 weeks in a row, you haven't contacted me, I probably will drop you, but don't count on it. There's a certain drop dead date, which I think is February 21st. I'm not quite sure how they're working it this semester. But if you're dropping, not attending the class, you want to drop it, take it on your dime, make it your responsibility to drop, and don't assume that I will. But also, if you're not attending and you don't contact me, and you still want to be involved in the class, you might find yourself dropped because that's just how it is. I don't have an office on campus. Obviously, nobody is pretty much on campus, but I provided you with an email. I provided you with an emergency phone, which is my 360 number. And I've also provided you a number for my cell phone. Please don't call me on my cell phone. Text me. If you want a phone conversation, I can call you back using my house line. And email is probably the best way. I don't normally talk on my cell phone. I do carry it with me most of the time. So please use texting instead. Let's see what else here. So the phone number for texting is the 456-6546. And the house number, which is just rang here, is 360-0669. And please use that only when it is really, really critical, whatever. When you contact me via email, and you got an email sent to you earlier this morning, probably about midnight or 1 o'clock, basically, at least in the subject field, put down CS130. So I know that that's related to the Pierce College class that we're conducting right now. Otherwise, it may just go into my spam bucket, never seen. And also be sure that you include your name, because some students prefer to use their own personal email. That's fine. When I send out a blanket email to all the students, I always use your Pierce College or LACCD account. But if you respond to me or send me an email using your own personal email, and I'm responding back to you and you only, I'm perfectly willing to respond to your personal email. The stuff you send me, please don't send it to my Pierce College email. Send it to my Gmail account that I provided for. It's right here, cs130@gmail.com. And I have another one, which is CS116 for my other class, whatever. Zoom officially starts at 8:55. I'll try to be on time. The link that I sent you, the passcode, that's good for the whole semester, up through and including, I believe it's June the 7th, which is the last day, which we may or may not have the final on. I don't know yet what the policy is going to be. And I wrote on here, applicable this morning, as a courtesy to both the other students and the instructor, please mute your Zoom interface when you're not listening, and always attempt to minimize background noise, which heard a little while ago. What's the class about? Working knowledge of lower levels of abstraction in a computer system. The first part of the Zai books, chapter 1, deals with the concept of abstraction. And it's sort of a vague, not maybe vague isn't the right word, it's a difficult idea to sort of wrap your arms around. basically, when you're writing, let's go back to CS116. You wrote some programs, and somehow magically something happened down at the hardware level, and voila, you got some stuff on the screen that was related, hopefully, to the program that you wrote. Or even at a higher level, you get stuff on the internet. We're doing a Zoom connection right now. How does this all work? So the concept of abstraction is we're working at a very, very high level of what's called abstraction, which means that we are really very, very distant from the hardware, the ones and zeros that make the microprocessor work, the ones and zeros that make the interface, say the Wi-Fi interface, the ones and zeros that make the display work, the ones and zeros that make the keyboard work, the ones and zeros that make the mouse work. All of these are very, very remote to us. So we're working in a very, very abstracted environment at a very, very high level. So in this class, we're going to move down a little bit closer. We're not going to be writing machine language code, but we're going to be writing a language called assembly language that can be very easily translated into the ones and zeros that make the microprocessor do our bidding. And you can take an executable file, and you can what's called disassemble it. You can actually see a machine language representation. I don't know whether we'll do that in this class or not, but it's interesting. For instance, if you wrote a program in C or C++, a simple program, and you disassembled it, what would it actually look like? Well, those constructs that you would see in there would be most likely very specific to either the microprocessor that you have in your computer, which is either probably most likely going to be Intel. It could be for the Mac or it could be for the PC, but basically those constructs are specific to the language that particular that particular microprocessor understands. Excuse me. Dust in the air, I get allergies in the morning. Okay, so it says, so in effect, learning the lower levels of abstraction is equivalent to learning new languages. Your knowledge will be a working language because you will know how to program in these languages. You probably thought that the language that we're, I think you sort of got the hang of it. And the same thing will be true here. The difference is that depending on what processor we choose, some of the constructs that we use will be different depending upon the particular processor that we have. If I'm not mistaken, the zyBooks is based, I don't know if you can see this, based upon this particular textbook, which I've also been reading, and it very much follows along the lines of the zyBooks. So I believe that the zyBooks people, they didn't steal it, it's the same company, basically created zyBooks as an electronic version with some significant enhancements over that book, but the meat that's in that book is pretty much the same. Policies and procedures. Be sure to get zyBooks. If you need help, contact me. As you're following through the course and the materials unfolding, you should definitely feel comfortable getting help from the tutors that are available. Again, I don't know who is going to be doing that. Bryce Strowman, I believe his last name is Bryce Strowman, was the helper that we had for CS116. Very sharp kid, knows a lot more than I do. So when I get in trouble, I go to him. So if you go to him, you're probably going to get the right answer right away. Canvas access, well, probably you know how to do that if you're on Zoom right now, but it's this ilearn.laccd.edu that'll take you into Canvas, and you basically will log in. I've never done it because I can't get the same interface that you get as an instructor. I don't see what you see exactly, but you need your student ID and that's some information of how to create that for getting first access. No makeups, just because of the way the class is conducted, it doesn't make any, it just isn't possible. So don't ask me if you miss a test. Tell me ahead of time I'm going to be out of town, I got a family emergency, or I've got a party to go to, or something like that. And maybe we can work out something that way. But after the fact, no, don't do that. Withdrawals, it's your responsibility. Academic integrity policy, basically, it's in simplicity, the work that you submit. This applies to both labs and tests, and maybe some homework assignments. Really should reflect your work. Copying from somebody else is a cheating. You probably know today in some of the uh, humanities type classes, whatever, the professors have the ability to do a check on submitted, like for instance, you're writing a report, you're writing some kind of document, they have a way to check that. But we don't have anything like that. So basically, if you want to cheat, I can't stop you. I'm not even going to worry about it. But you're cheating yourself. You're not going to learn the way you should. So do work. Um, I'm going to assume that you will be using a Windows-based computer, although the work can be done on a Mac. Some people like Mac. C++ programs. In fact, Wednesday, not this week, but Wednesday of next week, you're going to be doing that. The exercise that we'll do next week, you're going to write a C++ program to actually start manipulating values of variables at the bit for an instant in 116, but now you're actually going to be doing that. So you need to have access to either Visual Studio 2017, 2019, either one of those available for, or some of the students may prefer to use RPL.IT, although I understand there's been some changes, which works pretty well for almost everything that you will be doing. RAPL.IT basically is a program that allows you to create C++ programs, but the software you're using doesn't reside on your computer. Basically, all the work is done back at the server that they provide. Studio 17 or 19, it actually gets installed on your computer. And I give the students in the CS130 class the choice, and I think only 2 students chose to use RPL.IT. The rest were using either Visual Studio 17 and 19. It's really an excellent program, and there's a lot of capability in there that we never even quite get to use. If you have special needs, you need to be registered with special services at Pierce College, and they will contact me with any special needs you have. I've had several cases in the past where students need special consideration, and that's absolutely guaranteed to you. Don't hesitate if you need that, but you must do that originally through special services. I had an occasion, I'm looking under privacy here, I had an occasion where the mother of one of my students wanted information about the class, and I informed her, and she was not happy to hear this, that she has no legal right to that information. I can provide the student any information he or she wants, but I am not allowed by law to provide any information to anybody that nobody else has. So if you're trying to keep that private, that's part of my responsibility. So books, we don't have a schedule posted for what assignments are in Zybooks, but I've given you for the first couple weeks what is your responsibility, and that's posted in the Canvas copy of the syllabus you have. Back to labs. Remember, the lab assignments are posted not in the lecture section, but the lab section on Canvas. Most of them are password protected. You'll find 2 of them that are there that are password protected for this week and for next week. On Wednesday, when you log in, we'll talk about what the lab is about. And then I will give you the password. And I do it in that order because I want students to listen to the instructions that I have and then be able to access. It's like you came into class, I gave you a pep talk about the lab, and then I passed out a copy of the lab. It's the same idea. How long do you have? 2 weeks after they're assigned. There may be exceptions to that. Certainly, for instance, over in spring break, whatever, I will try to keep that. Everybody needs to know. So the schedule that we have so far, there's not a lot of information on here yet, but I do know that typically on the 6th week and then the 11th week, we'll have our midterms. How about the midterms? How are they conducted? Probably pretty much the same way that I did in 116, 2 parts. Part of it will be a written part, and you will be provided a PDF fillable form. Basically, you will have the outline of each of the questions, and you will type in on your keyboard the answers that you have for each of the questions. And then you will basically save that. You'll put your initials on there, basically, and there's a procedure for that to be provided. And then you will save that document as a PDF file. You have a copy, and then you send me your copy, and then I mark from that. So it's as if you handed me a piece of paper, except it's all done electronically. So that would be the first part. After you're finished the first part, you'll be given the password for the second part. And typically the second parts, you'll be creating some kind of a program. In 116, you were creating C++ programs. Here, you're going to be doing something more like in an assembly language. And you will submit your code, not your finished output, because I will do that on my computer. And be sure that you send it only to my Gmail account. And that's pretty much it. So for the midterms, final exam, pretty much that's all there is to it. Now, since this class isn't as interactive as it can be, oh, I see Dina logged on here. Hi, Dina. It's not as easy for you to ask questions as before. Let's go to the next.
Why not?
Hi there. I recognize that voice. Richard is with us also. The next topic of business is how to create a Zybooks account. One of the students informed me, and I think it's been corrected, that our section, and again, this is the chaos that all of a sudden happened with one of the instructors left. I think that's been corrected. So I think this step-by-step should serve you fairly well. I tried to do it. I created a bogus account, which probably Zybooks isn't happy about. But the only way I can see the same screens that you see is to do something like that. So if you go to zybooks.com, you should get an opening screen that looks something like this. And if you look up this area here, I don't know, you can see my mouse. I'm circling this orange colored box here. It says create account. That basically is where you're going to be starting. Take you to a screen where you're going to start creating an account. It would be helpful if you would make sure that your last name is exactly the same as the last name your last name as appears on the roster. As far as first name, I don't really care. but the sorting is done by the last name and it needs to match up with what's on the roster. As far as email is concerned, so you put your first name, whatever you choose to put on there, your last name, and again, please, as it appears on the roster. Email, you can use your personal email or you can use your Pierce College email, either one. Honestly, I don't know what most students prefer. It's really up to you. You confirm your email, and you create a password and confirm the password. I never see that, so be sure that you know what it is, write it down, hide it, do whatever. But if you lose it, I can't help you with that. You have to go back to Zybooks and have them basically unlock your account so that you can create a new password. Don't check I am an instructor because it'll just cause you some grief. Then click create account. So I created this bogus account, and all of this, of course, is fictitious, whatever. Type that in, click create account, move to the next screen. Pardon me. Basically, you're going to be asked for the ID for the class that we have, and you'll see that here in just a second. And according to what I've been told, is that capitalization does count as far as what you're going to enter at this particular screen. And you'll see it just a second. So in this box here where it says enter your Zybooks code here, you will be entering this. So according to what they've told me, it should be in capital letters except for the letters PRING for spring. So Pierce College CS130 spring 2021, no spaces. And I understand, I was told, I don't know whether that's true, that it's case dependent. So be sure you have uppercase and lowercase the way this is, just to be sure. Same rules as you do with passwords. This particular book is a fairly large book. The first chapter, for instance, it's equivalent of about 140 pages just for one chapter. Second chapter, I don't know how big, but I know it's over 100 pages. So it's a little bit more expensive than the one for CS116. According to this, it's $72. Now, what the Zybooks people have told me is that if you drop the class after purchasing your Zybooks account and then you re-enroll for the fall class, your license that you purchase will be good for a second semester. So if you end up with family emergencies, and certainly that's not to be unexpected with this horrible disease that's going around, and you have to drop out for some reason, you haven't lost your money provided you enroll for a second semester. Now, if you can't enroll in the fall and you need to come back in the spring, I'm not sure how that works, but I think the Zybooks people would be accommodating. You might have to go back through them, but hopefully you're going to complete the class exactly as it is. So I typed this in just to see what happens if you type it incorrectly. So I truncated it. Instead of being 2021, I just put 21. And it says Zybooks code not recognized. So be sure to put in the complete code typed exactly the way it was presented back on this page here. Pierce College, CS130, spring 2021, no spaces. And again, if you do it correctly, it should be accepted. And then you click on the orange box here, it says View Zybooks. We're going to be covering probably the first 5 chapters of this book. And so, well, gee, that's not a lot, but these chapters are really, really long. Now, one thing you can do, if you're not absolutely sure you want to spend the $72, not absolutely sure you want to stay in the class, you can just go on there, create an account, and you could access the first chapter here. That's a plus and it's a minus. It's a plus because you could do it for free, but it's a minus because if you do all of the work, that means the participation activities, and then you decide, oh, I'm going to buy the book, that information is lost. So keep that in mind. That I believe what design books people have told me is that information is lost and cannot be recovered. So since I'm expecting you to do those exercises, you might just read the chapter, don't do the work, or just do a little bit on it. And then say, oh yeah, I want to get it. So buy the license, because that's all you're getting is a license. And then do the work, and then the results that you create will be, and I'll get through some of those. That will be sent back to their server, which collects that information, and then it's accessible to the instructors. So chapter 1, I believe you could read for free. Chapters 2 to 10 says available to subscribers. That means you got to pay the money, honey. After you do that, this is the screen you're going to see. Now, normally this area over here under current assignments will list all your assignments. I don't know what the flow is. Mr. Hart and Mr. Murphy and Mr. O'Neill never filled this out. In CS116, Mrs. Krim did that, Professor Krim did that, but nobody's done this. So I'm not quite sure how this is going to unfold. And by the end of the semester, I think we'll all know how to fill it out. So this will not be terribly helpful for you. Go by the listings in the syllabus, which are going to get updated probably every week as I see what the assignments are going to be. So when you click on one of these, basically it's a link to different chapters. Let's go to the next screen here. And again, this is ultimately is going to get filled out. Now, let's see if I can manipulate this here. I'm going to log into my Zoom account here. When you get to this screen, you'll see this collection. So if you're in 116, you would pick the 116 book. If you're in 130, you would pick this book right here. Simply click on it. And see, this information now has been updated a little bit. It says that Professor O'Neill and I are the instructors. Here's our section. So this is now correct as far as the screen is concerned. Whether click on one of those. Now, what I've done is I've taken all of this information and I've created it as a PDF file. I cannot provide it to you because it doesn't belong to me. It's copyrighted, but I can use it for lectures material. So you just go down to a series of what are called participation activities. And there's another category is the computer industry is not improving quite as rapidly as the transportation industry. Well, you'd have to decide if you click on false and the right answer, then it gives you a little bit of additional information. Let's pick one here. It's agriculture. What if I pick, let me read this, what it says here. Now let's put this here. So I've deliberately picked the wrong answer. So it will give you some information about whether or what really is going on. Now, what I understand though is that this, even though you can change it, it still shows up in your report as having been entered incorrect. I believe that's how it works. So you have a whole series of these that you would go through. And based upon the reading that's just prior to this, you should be able to answer these questions. Now, there's another kind that basically you just do, although you don't really enter anything. And it goes through sort of almost like a slow motion type video, and it talks about different things, and it pauses at different points. And then it explains which of the captions that it applies to. And that's really all you have to do in this. It's basically just a learning exercise. There are some highlighted terms in here that you should learn for your vocabulary. You would be held responsible for knowing definitions of items that show in blue background like this. And there's quite a few of them. Most of these, I think you will, at least in the beginning of the class, most of these, I think you'll have a pretty good idea of what it is. I think most of you know what a personal computer is. Anyway, another buzzword. So pictorially and information-wise, I think they've done a pretty good job. I laugh when I look at this because I just put a new air conditioner in a couple of years ago, and I think the thermostat we have is pretty much just like this. So again, you have more participation activities. I don't know if this chapter has what's called a challenge activity, but anyway, those are part of your reading assignments. You're assigned reading certain sections and then do the participation activities. And then sometimes at the end of a chapter, let's see, I can't get to the down scroll because let's see, no, there's no challenge activity. Sometimes you see challenge activity. And basically you're either right or you're wrong on that. There's no second chance, whatever. So that's what's going on as far as Zybook's concerned. Okay, so this is posted on Canvas. Should be pretty straightforward going through. Now, the next thing I want you to look at would be, this is not something you're required to do, but I would recommend it. And again, in the 116 class, most students elected to do this. Some did the repl.it, which doesn't reside on your computer per se. Why am I showing you this? Not this week, but next week you're going to have an assignment where you're going to be manipulating at the bit level. We're not really prepared to do that at the assembly level, but you could do it at the do that. So it gives you a set of instructions here, how to install, download, install, and you can use 2017. They want you to use 2019. Why did I pick 17? Before the pandemic, the Pierce College computers all had 2017, not 2019. Microsoft wants you to use 2019. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But these instructions were written to match up to what was at Pierce at the time. And as far as I know, it still hasn't changed. But this is a free copy. You have to create a Microsoft account, but it's free. I mean, all that means is maybe they're going to send you ads sometime. So you would click on this link, and it would send you to a set of instructions of how to step-by-step download it. And this is the version that you want. It's a little bit more complete. Either actually any one of these would be okay. This is the one that matched up best to we had Enterprise 2017. We're getting close to a break time, so I'm aware of that. It takes a while because the size of this is a fairly large file. When you get to this screen for this class, and also for 2000 CS116, you want to select this because you're going to be doing desktop development, fairly simple programs, but relatively simple programs where basically you just have one module rather than having to link a whole bunch of modules together. You're just going to have one as a desktop application. Make the choice, select the box here where the down arrow is pointing, and then go through the installation process. And depending upon the speed of your internet, it takes a fair amount of time to download all of this. You'll be queried. Do you want to do that? So you click Save the File. And if you notice on my computer, I had actually installed both versions, 2017 and 2019. You could do either one. I wouldn't say there's no reason to do both. I did the 19 because I was hoping the school would upgrade. I don't know if they've done that or not yet. And some other stuff that you can get the menus in different languages. I have trouble with English. The rest of them I can't do at all. And this is just largely fluff here. Okay, it's break time. We'll be back. Just a few minutes after 10 o'clock then. Pardon me, after, 10 o'clock. So see you in about 10 minutes. Oops. Sorry. Okay, we should be back up here. It's 1 minute after. I just wanted to show real quickly. Um, one of the things you're going to be asked to do from time to time, certainly on your Wednesday lab, is to capture a screenshot of something that you're working on. So, for instance, let's suppose I was running this, and this is part of what you're going to be doing on Wednesday. It just puts a couple pixels on the screen. So one of the things you're asked to do is to capture basically just that portion. So we're interested in this area right here where the 3 pixels. To do that, anytime you want to capture what's on the screen, whatever the active window is, and that's just the active window because I can move it, you hold down the Alt key and press the print screen button. Nothing appears to happen. Then you can go in and you can open up Paintbrush, hold the Control key down, press the letter V, and that's copied what you had into that. Now, to create a screenshot, you just grab the sky, move the sky up here, and then you say File. You can just save it as any format you want. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say I picked that. Fine. And then you crop it just simply by grabbing the lower border of the area. And now basically you can just save this. So basically now you've captured a screenshot, and then this you can do, you can cut and paste it into documents. Let's do that real quick. Let's go to another, well, let's do it here. So we go back to that screen. To capture that, you want to hold the Control key down and select the letter A, Control A. That means everything that's on that screen is going to be captured. Notice the border around it. And then copy, you do Control the letter C, go back to your document. And then for some reason, the paste is Control on the letter V. Hello. No, we'll get there eventually. Control Alt, Control C. I love it when these things don't work. Oh, I know why it doesn't work. That's because of that. There we go. And now you can position this anywhere else. So that's basically how you would capture a screenshot, which is one of the things you're going to be asked to do in the lab on Wednesday. You can capture almost anything on the screen by doing that. I'm going to undo that. I probably went through it fairly fast, so let's just go back over it real quick. So to capture a screen, whatever the active window is, you hold the Alt key down and press print screen on your keyboard. Then open up Paintbrush. You want to paste that in there, Control and the letter V, then edit it any way you want. I just basically cropped it, only the portion I was interested in, I cropped, and then saved it. You don't even have to save it if you don't want. Excuse me, you don't have to save it if you don't want. I just chose to do that. And then you could do Control A to select the entire active area, and you can see what the lines that are around there. Say, oh, this is the active area. And then you copy it by Control the letter C, and then you can paste it into almost any application that you want. I'm going to save file, exit, and don't save. There, save it. Okay. So anyway, that's part of what you're going to be doing from time to time is capturing screenshot. Again, you can capture the whole window and select any portion of you want. All you're asked to in Wednesday's class basically is to capture this guy right here. Now, let's take a look at what's in this window, sort of looking ahead. This looks like assembly code, and for all practical purposes, it is. But the guy that wrote this, Nick Morgan, basically wrote a simulator to make it look like you were programming a 6502 microprocessor. What does the code look like? Well, you can see on here that we have some mnemonics that sort of make sense. LDA, it's sort of, I would read that, of course, I've done this a little bit. LD for load, and then A. We're going to load A. Well, what is A? Well, A is a register. The register basically is a place inside the microprocessor where you can store something temporarily. So load A. Well, what are we going to load it with? Well, we're going to load it with, it turns out that if you, this particular sequence, this pound sign and the dollar sign, basically says it's a numeric value that you're going to put into that register. And STA, I have no idea what that is. Actually, I do, but you wouldn't necessarily. So some of these you need a little bit more explanation for. But this is the kind of coding that we're going to be doing. As you can see, probably far less intuitive than the C++ programs we were doing. There's not a huge number of these. Now, that's only partially true. Let me show you. I wonder if this is a PDF file that I captured. This is the entire instruction set for the 6502 microprocessor. We're only doing this not because it's a current, which is not, it's old, microprocessor, but because it's very, very instructive. The original microprocessor had these entities here, I don't know what it's called, which are basically instructions that the microprocessor understands. So let's try to differentiate between what we did and what we're going to do. When you wrote an instruction, basically what we call a statement in your source code for C++, you were writing an instruction that the compiler understood. Okay? Had nothing to do with what the microprocessor understands. It's what the compiler understood. And then it was the compiler's responsibility to translate those instructions that you made as part of your program, convert it into a code that the microprocessor understands. Okay, so you were at one level of abstraction higher than assembly code because you wrote in a language, C++, language that the compiler understood. The compiler was able to translate what you wrote, hopefully you were successful, into an intermediate language, which is assembly code. And then ultimately that assembly code got submitted as ones and zeros to the microprocessor. So for instance, if you notice here, I don't know if I can see, well, there's this chart requires explanation. The original 6502 microprocessor had this set of instructions, and those instructions are provided as what's called a hexadecimal code. And you would have this for the left-hand part, and this is the right-hand side. So the code right here for BRK, which stands for break, would be 0, 0. Down here, this code would be 9, 0. The one I just highlighted, that would be 9, 0. Down here, this would be F0. What does that mean? Well, probably some of you are not familiar with hexadecimal notation. One of the things we need to talk about in this class is understanding the number system that the microprocessor deals with. You and I deal with a number system that was based upon 8 fingers and 2 thumbs, a total of 10 digits. So our number system, which we basically got from the Arabs, which is, if you look at the Roman system, it was terrible. But the Arabic system, which is what we use, is really quite clever. And we use the digits 0 through 9. So our numbers are all built upon that. Well, that's great, but the computers work in a binary system, and they like to work with powers of 2. And guess what? 10 is not an easy power of 2. But the number 16 is, if you raise 2 to what, the 4th power, it's 16. So we created a new language of numbers, a new number set, let's call it, where we use the same 0 through 9 digits, but then we added letters A, B, C, D, E, and F. Now, some people like to use lowercase, some people like to use uppercase letters. It doesn't really matter. In terms of the number system, uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter. Whoever put this chart together used uppercase. That's my preference. It's easier to read. Not required. Lowercase is fine. Okay? So the numbers for the left-hand part of the instruction go from 0 through F. The second part is 0 through F. So this instruction down here, which doesn't exist, would be FF. So the microprocessor internally can interpret whatever this 2-digit number is, ranging from 0, 0 to FF. It interprets that as doing one of these and only one of these operations at a time. Now, what that translates into inside the microprocessor, that's another level of abstraction that we really don't need to deal with. All we need to know is that the microprocessor, the 6502 microprocessor, understood that if you gave it a code 00, it was to execute an instruction which we interpret as break, okay? This instruction right here, A2, okay? A2 is an instruction that says load a register inside the microprocessor, which we just call the X register, and you put some value in it. So basically, you're programming at a different level of abstraction, and you have to visualize the resources that are inside this chip that we call the microprocessor. And again, each microprocessor is different, each instruction set is different, but there's certain basic instructions that are fairly common. Load a register, add some values together, shift some values, Things like this are very common in just about any microprocessor, but they all have a different language, and the code that's decoded inside the microprocessor chip itself depends upon the what we call the opcode. So the opcode for loading the X register is A2, whatever. So when you see things like that, that's an instruction that the microprocessor understands. We write it in a language that we can sort of understand, but that gets translated by this assembler into the ones and zeros that the microprocessor understands. So back in Visual Basic or C++, whatever, we wrote in a language where we used terms that we were sort of comfortable with. After a while, we sort of got to understand what you could and could not do, what were the tools that were available. And we found out that there were really hundreds of different things that we could do. There were hundreds of different constructs that the C++ compiler understood. But for each one of those instructions, like for instance, if I wanted to add two numbers together, so I would have actually four parts of the statement in C++. I would have whatever the destination is, let's say A equals B plus C. Well, we can understand that. We learned that kind of construct probably back in high school, maybe even in elementary school. Just take the value of A, add it to the value of B. I'm sorry, take the value of B, add it to the value of C, and put it into the value for A, whatever. Well, in C++, pretty straightforward, but we have to find some instruction down here that allows us to do that. And the instruction really to do that consists of four parts. It's a mnemonic ADD. The next number is where do you want to put this? So we have to know what are the resources inside the microprocessor where I can put something. These are generally called registers. So I have to identify the register, which is the destination. Then I have to say, well, what is the first value that I want to add? Where is it? Oh, it's in some other register. Okay, now, where's the other value? I have to tell it what register that value is. So I have add a letter, let's say the destination, another letter, which is the register where the first variable is, and another letter where the variable is. And by the way, it could be the same variable repeated because basically you can double the number, whatever. So that's the kind of thinking that we have to do. So we choose from a menu of these type of statements in assembly language. These are the type of statements that are available to us. And then we have to understand, well, what are these funny little things, either in parentheses or having a pounds, or you call them a hashtag now. I think we have to understand what those really mean. And once we master those, then we can submit it to the assembler, and the assembler will translate these into ones that the microprocessor can understand. Now, what is this chart? The top part's all colored. Well, this is the original microprocessor in red, black, and white. That's what was happening. But as time went on, they enhanced this. They came out with a CMOS version of it that is a 65C02 right here. And they added some instructions. There were basically, almost looks like there's three different generations. So we're not going to really learn the 6502 microprocessor, but we're going to do some simulations because what we do simulating it is very, very similar. The same ideas, the same concepts apply to many other microprocessors that we're going to be dealing with. Okay, I'm starting to lose my voice already here. Okay. So again, the lab report you're going to be generating, you're going to have a set of screenshots and you're going to have some other numbers, whatever. And then you're going to put it out as a document. You can send me the document as a document. You can't do it as a text file because you can't import um, screenshots like this, but as a document or as a PDF file, whatever. I was supposed to, and I didn't do this earlier. I need to go back and be sure to cover this. Hopefully, posted on Canvas, you see this calendar. There's certain dates that are important to us. Next Monday is a school holiday. It's a federal holiday also, that we don't have a class. So we have a class today, we have a class on Wednesday, and we have a class on next Wednesday. We have a holiday for Cesar Chavez on the 31st of March. We have spring break, and then Memorial Day, we have a holiday also. So these are days where there's no classes. And I was supposed to mention this. Okay. Let's take a look a little bit at the remaining time that we have. Just a second here. I'll try not to make this terribly boring, but I don't expect you necessarily to be able to read this, but this is what you're going to see as you got a peek into the Xi books. And the first part of the first chapter is sort of a background that I think is worth taking a look at, because the authors try to introduce to you in a simplistic way, the evolution of computers. Um, Probably the earliest computer of which I'm aware is the abacus. The abacus was used, in fact, it was interesting. My wife and I were in Singapore in 1980, and we were in one of the gigantic shopping malls there, and they're selling all this latest and greatest high-tech electronic equipment, certainly including handheld calculators and things like that. And when you go to pay for it, most of the store operators, how do they do the calculations? They used an abacus. So it was really quite interesting because it was a throwback to ancient times. But that's what the tool was that they had learned with. That was a tool that they were comfortable with. Back in 1940-ish, whatever, digital type computers were finally starting to be conceived. And one probably of the greater thinkers, who unfortunately doesn't get as much credit as he should, was Alan Turing. Alan Turing, basically his brilliance, was able to figure a way to crack what was called the Enigma code. The Germans, for both their military on the ground, their air force in the air, and their ships, and particularly their submarines at sea, encrypted all of their messages in a manner that was considered to be uncrackable. Nobody could decipher it. And the number of possibilities of how this encryption could happen was this number that had a gazillion digits. But the British realized that we had to find, or they had to find some way to be able to read them. And based upon some extremely brilliant, what's called cryptanalysis that was done by three Polish mathematicians, it laid the groundwork for a mathematical solution. They found that mathematically the German code was not uncrackable, but unfortunately there was no hardware available to you. There was no personal computer. There was no handheld calculator. Yeah, there was an abacus and there was a pencil and some paper and maybe some of these adding machines, mechanical adding machines, but that was it. But Alan Turing conceived of a machine which ultimately was called the Colossus for actually doing a mathematical analysis using physical hardware to actually crack these codes. And if you watch the movie, The Imitation Game, you see basically how all of this ultimately came about. But today, in our entire world that we live in, there's computers in just about everything. When you go to get a smog check, the smog people will read a computer inside of your car. The washing machine that we have, the dryer we have, all have some kind of a microprocessor, which is a form of a computer in it. My wife, my daughter, her boyfriend all have what are called Apple Watches. Well, there's some kind of a processor inside of those. We have handheld calculators. We have smartphones and things like that. So computers are just absolutely ubiquitous. They're just absolutely everywhere. So it talks about some of the locations where you see stuff like this. One of the most important things that's going on right now, in fact, Dr. Fauci was on the news this morning talking about it, is, as you know, the doctors or whatever were able to crack the genetic code of this virus that's going around and killing hundreds of thousands of people. And they were able to, as a result of that, a number of companies were able to develop vaccines just based upon the mathematical knowledge that they were extracting by cracking the genome of this particular virus. Unfortunately, now the virus is mutated, but now they're at work to try to figure out, well, what's going on and what do we need to do? How do we need to change things to provide protections? I've already gotten one of the shots from the Pfizer vaccine, but is it going to work against some of the, say, the South African viruses? So this is where computers are coming into play. You notice it says here the Human Genome Project. This is when we first were able to figure out, well, what is the genetic code, the sequence of the four, I guess they're amino acids or whatever, that basically form the structure of all, basically almost all living things that we know of. Not possible without computers. So when I grew up, I saw a movie called When Worlds Collide, and they showed this gigantic room with this gigantic mechanical calculator that was doing some analysis to figure out, well, when is the Earth going to be destroyed by this planet that was encroaching upon it? And then later on, as things went on, I see these big rooms with these gigantic IBM, whatever. Well, today, we don't see things like this. We hold in our hands a handheld calculator, a smartphone, a smartwatch, whatever, where things have just shrunk down to an incredibly small physical size, and the capability has just gone absolutely berserk in terms of things that can be done, and who knows it's going to be. So this first chapter talks about the sort of the flow of how things are advancing technology-wise, whatever, and who knows what they're going to be like a year from now, whatever. Now, one of the things the authors did in here that sort of irked me was they never explained it. COD basically is an acronym that they pop up all over the place. All it is a reference to this book, Computer Organization and Design. Never, ever explained. Throughout the book, there's a number of these drawings here where they talk about sort of the interaction. And if you look around your house, your apartment, whatever, even your car, let's take a car for a minute. Your motor in your car has a fairly sophisticated air pollution control system that's all controlled by a computer. It monitors stuff in the exhaust. It monitors the incoming air temperature, the incoming air pressure. It monitors temperatures inside the um, engine itself, and it makes certain decisions based upon that. All these are controlled by basically special function computing elements, not a computer necessarily in the same sense of the computer we're using right here to look at the Zoom connection that we have, but nevertheless, they have the same basic underlying functionality that is all based upon silicon, whatever. So anywhere you look, you could come up with sort of a block diagram of all the different elements that sort of tie together that um, make a computing system. Now, if we were at Pierce College, we might see something set up like this. In the lab there, 1502, 1504, whatever the numbers are, 1500, can't remember the numbers 4 and 5, been so long since I was there. We have a server that has connected to it probably 100 or more computers, I would, or maybe it's approaching 100 computers, whatever, and makes communication to the outside world possible, communication within the room itself from one computer to another possible, communication to a printer, maybe to a scanner, whatever. This forms a little computing network, whatever. And one of the concepts here is that rather than having a computer which has its own monitor and it has its own printer and it has its own scanner, we can share resources on a network and have a group of individual computers that can use a common interface to the internet, a common interface to a printer, to a scanner, whatever. And this becomes a whole network. So the question is, how does this all work? Well, our class is going to try to identify at a deeper level, how do we make these devices that we call microprocessors or microcontrollers, how do we make them work? We don't speak their language. We speak a language that maybe we don't even have a language at all when we go onto the internet or we send a job to the printer. We really don't have a language per se. In the predecessor for this class, 116, we had a language that was able to ultimately, through some intermediaries, was able to talk to the microprocessor. Well, today we're going to go down inside some of these elements here and try to be able to talk closer to the language that the microprocessor understands. One of the things they talk about, and again, look for these buzzwords and make sure they become part of your vocabulary for our class. It's important that we all talk the same language. It talks about what a server is. And for instance, probably today you hear this term called cloud computing. Pierce College now has a couple of classes in cloud computing. And I'm offered free storage. Like, for instance, I have a whole bunch of stuff that students send me or I send out. I can have a lot of that stored for free by companies like Google, whatever. And all of this is interfaced through a whole bunch of what are called servers that allow information to come in, information to come out. That how does it all work? It's just something that we've sort of come to expect. So the book sort of asks us to sort of try to address that, to sort of think about, well, what might possibly be involved? What are the steps? Now, down inside most of these things, we have what's called a circuit board. And this is what I spent when I had a call a real job. I designed stuff like this. That was my job for I won't tell you how many years, a lot of years, whatever. I designed circuit boards like this. And even then, I'm down at the hardware level. I have to know what these different devices are. It's a voltage regulator, a counter, some kind of programmable logic device. I didn't know what those things are, what their capabilities are, how it fitted into an overall system. But I'm still not down at the level of how the innards of these devices work. So we're trying to get a little closer to those. Should we look at some of these? In the flow for the Zybooks, they periodically have this section they call elaborations. And it says elaborations are short features used throughout the text to provide more detail on a particular subject that may be of interest. Then it says disinterested readers may skip over an elaboration since the subsequent material will never depend upon the contents of the elaboration. I never quite understood how they wrote that exactly, whatever. They do mention something here called VHDL. If we go back up here, maybe this isn't a real good example, but on some of these circuit boards, there will be devices which are called integrated circuits that, and here's probably an example, a very good possibility here. Some of these devices that are on here, when you put them into your circuit, put them down onto the circuit board, they're completely functionless, okay? They are a family of what's called programmable logic. And basically what we have to do is we have to establish some kind of a language that you and I can digest that can talk to the innards of this device. It's very similar to what we're trying to learn in this class, where we're going to work in a language, assembly language, that gets down very close to what the microprocessor or the microcontroller understands. So we're working down at a much lower level, closer to the ones and zeros that make this whole thing work. So keep in mind that even though this text doesn't mention it specifically, that today inside many of these devices that we see, not only are there microprocessors, who's doing that, but please turn it off. Thank you. But there are other kinds of devices that have their own specific language that says to us, okay, I'm a piece of silicon. Tell me what you want to do. So I have to have a language for that. And the language that you write in that is, there's a number of different languages. One of them is mentioned, I think, back here. You don't see it, called VHDL, it's Verilog high level description language, whatever. And there's classes for that. Pierce doesn't teach this, but CSUN does. But it's another language that is a very low on the abstraction level, very close to the hardware per se. We're going to be dealing with talking to microprocessors, but it doesn't mean that's the only type of communication that's going on in this world today. When they talk about the growth of different kinds of devices, like most people, I had a cell phone for a while, but then people have got these real neat iPhones, and wow, look at all the things you can do with that. So the sales for cell phones sort of died, but smartphones sort of took off. And it's been said that the computing power inside a smartphone exceeds the computing power that was on the Apollo spacecraft that landed on the moon back in that went to the moon, and part of it landed on the moon back in 1969. And today we just sort of think of this as nothing. It's sort of something we expect. Look at the PC sales; they're growing, but they're not growing very much. Tablet types, iPads and stuff like that. I don't even use my iPad very much anymore. I used to, because my phone can do a lot of that. So the evolution is just continuing at an absolute rapid pace. Cloud computing is a term you should know. Collection of servers over the internet, whatever. Now, what could be there? It could be a place to store things. But look at the next bullet here called software as a service. For instance, you're buying a license to Zybooks. Well, physically, what do you have? You have nothing. But you have a license to go to some location, I have no idea where basically an electronic version of that exists. There are software entities, good example, repl.it. Some students use that in some of the CS130 classes for creating their programs. It didn't reside on their computer. It resided somewhere else. Now, if you downloaded Visual Studio, yeah, that was on your computer and whatever, you had that available to you. And even if the internet went out, you could still develop programs. If you get a hiccup in your internet connection or your internet goes completely out, now you can't use things like RPL. But it falls into this category as a software as a service. You have basically a compiler that you have access to electronically, and they're providing you a service largely for free, where basically you can do software development at some level using their software on their hardware somewhere remote. So it's a service that's provided. It's a software service that's provided to you. Anyway, then they go through, well, what can you learn from this book, whatever. Get that. If you look at the evolution of the microprocessors, back in, let's say there was Radio Shack had one called the TRS something, or people said that stood for the word trash, but actually it was quite good. Some people were really getting ahead of the game and building these little computing, mini computer type things back then. And then finally Intel got into the business, and they had their different levels of computers. They had the 80, there was a Z80, the 8086. And then the Pentium line came along, whatever, and they had different versions of the Pentiums. And then finally they got into a new philosophy, recognizing that they needed to have more capability than was just available in a single microprocessor. So the question is, could I put several microprocessors together so that if the software was clever enough, they could have different parts of the chip, the microprocessor chip, doing different tasks at the same time. And that led to what we call the multi-core, or Intel just calls it core, whatever, core 7, for instance, where they actually have different processing elements inside the chip. There's certain bottlenecks as far as memory access is concerned, whatever. But the bottom line is that software that can recognize what the capabilities are, you can have inside the chip going on simultaneously a number of independent type of calculations. So depending upon how many of these cores that you had in there, and depending upon how efficient the software was, you could make this microprocessor do a whole bunch of things in parallel, which means that even though the processor itself didn't get any faster, the amount of throughput, that means how much you could process at any given time, that was increased. But think about you're trying to learn an assembly language program. How are you going to do this? You have to understand what each of the resources is that's inside each of these cores. And then you have to think about your program, what you want to accomplish. And you have to think, well, how am I going to allocate different parts of this hardware, different tasks based upon the things that I want to do? And even though the capability is there, the level of complexity to use these cores, if you want to call them efficiently, is very, very challenging. So why am I mentioning this? It's one thing to be able to sit down and translate a problem or situation into a series of commands, either at a higher level, C++, or who knows, whatever language you might, or down at the assembly language level, which you're getting close in the hardware. But if you don't understand the architecture of the hardware, that means what are the resources that are inside this hardware? How do I talk to each one of them? What are the bottlenecks so that can I talk to all of them at the same time? Or do I have to talk to them one at a time? It requires you to not only understand the language of the at the assembly level, but to understand the architecture of the hardware to know what are all the resources, how do I access them, how do I share their capabilities in the most efficient way. So it isn't simply sitting down and writing, do this, do this, do this, do this. Now that'll work, but if you want to be really efficient and use all of the capabilities that are in there, you have to have a very deep understanding of the different resources, particularly when we get into what we call multi-core processor, being able to properly use all of the capabilities that are there. I don't know why they put this term acronym towards the latter part of the chapter here, but an acronym basically is, and you see them all the time. People talk about, oh, the CPU or whatever. These are basically shorthand representation of a series of words, and acronyms should be capitalized. In my 116 class, I pointed out to the students, in fact, I think I even asked it on an exam, if I put the word RAM down, I said, well, what does that mean? What does the acronym RAM mean? And if I put it in lowercase, it means it's an animal. But if I put it in uppercase, it's random access memory. So unfortunately, in the world that we're going to be dealing with, or perhaps we're already involved with, there's quite a few different acronyms, many of which you're going to have to BIOS. This is a term that IBM coined back in the early 1980s with their first personal computer, basic input-output system. Basically, it was the brains of the computer that brought the computer to life when you first turned the power on. CPU, we use that term all the time. DIM, dual inline memory modules, goes on and on and on, and some of which you need to know. So there are a number of buzzwords that are in there that you need to pick up, and I share with your concern here because it becomes sort of mind-boggling how many there are. I don't know a lot of them. They change every week, it seems. I need to, in just a couple minutes, I need to deal with people that want to add. And on Wednesday, I want to cover a little bit more of the reading material. So please try to, number one, get Zybooks, or even if you don't choose at this time to purchase the Zybooks license, at least read the first few sections of chapter 1 that are mentioned in the syllabus. If you don't buy the license, you can't read chapter 2. This week, we'll probably not have time to get into the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 2 is sort of cool reading. It's not as boring as chapter 1. And then we'll talk a little bit about that on Wednesday. Then I'll talk a lot about the lab, about how to do it, what's expected. Lab number 1, I think you'll like, because it's getting you fairly close to dealing with assembly language. It's not difficult. You can complete it easily within an hour, including the documentation for it. Wednesday's lab on the following week is more difficult. It's fairly challenging. And we'll talk about that probably not until the following week, whatever. I did want to mention this, sort of wrapping up here. The world of computers deals with talking about sizes of things. And I'm not sure how many people really follow the dictates of this here, but I want you to understand the difference that you probably touched on this in 116. When we talk about sizing things in memory in particular, when we say it's a kilobyte or a megabyte or a gigabyte or a terabyte, whatever, those are really only approximations to the real number, okay? So for instance, they point out here a terabyte. This is the exact number. So it's like a million, a billion, what, like a trillion or something like that. It's like, this is a million, a billion. Yeah, so it's like roughly a trillion, but in fact, it's a little bit bigger than that. So they've created a new acronym set where they put the letter I in there to indicate that it really represents either the true number or the approximate. So when I say it's a megabyte, because that's a million, well, it really isn't exactly a million, okay? So when I say a gigabyte or a megabyte, whatever, it's an approximation to the real number, which is some power of 2. So for instance, a megabyte is 10, it's a million, 10 to the 6th. And gigabyte, terabyte, whatever. And then these things really get, I don't think most people really get up into these kinds of numbers here. So anyway, just keep in mind that when I say it's a megabyte or kilobyte, it's really only an approximation to a real number. And last, in closing here, I think it's definitely worth reading this section here because they talk about what they call great ideas, 8 great ideas. Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Intel. I was privileged to meet him in Beijing, China, many, many years ago. We, the company I worked for at the time, we were users of Intel products. And Intel was putting on basically a dog and pony show in China because they realized that China was an emerging market. So they wanted customers there to give presentations about how do I use Intel products, which certainly included Intel microprocessors, whatever. And Gordon Moore was there as one of the speakers. And he came up with a concept based upon his observations that the number of resources inside the computing elements of different kinds, including memory and processors, all of the stuff, basically doubles roughly in a time period of 1.5 to 2 years. And people have done studies and seems to be fairly it's probably tapered off a little bit now, but it seems to be fairly consistent for quite a long period of time. So it gave rise to what was called Moore's Law. Oh, let me point out one thing, John, if you could see me. If I have my two fingers here, say 12 inches apart, the rate at which energy, a radio beam or a light beam, no matter what, can be transmitted between those 2 points, going from one finger to another, it takes about 1 nanosecond, 1 billionth of a second for light to travel. That means that is the limit of how fast electrical information, in fact, it would flow even slower than that inside physical material. But that is the limit of how fast this finger and this finger can communicate, about 1 billionth of a second. Oh, that sounds awfully fast. But think about these microprocessors. When you go out and you buy a computer day, they'll tell you how fast their microprocessor is. They may say, well, it's a 3 gigabyte processor. That means the clock in it is ticking roughly 3 billion times per second. Oh, wait a minute, 3 billion times per second, that's a third of a nanosecond. That means it takes energy to only go about 4 inches, okay? So different parts of the microprocessor, if they're further apart than, say, 4 inches, they can't talk that fast. They can't talk any faster than that. And in fact, in physical media, it's not that fast. Well, 4 inches is huge compared to the size of these chips. But think about trying to make things faster and faster and faster. That means that every tick of the clock, as the clock gets faster, every tick of the clock, the distance that energy can travel gets smaller and smaller. So we're up to some ultimate limit how fast, it's just water, by the way, how fast we can make our electronic devices. So today, everything basically is done in silicon. Now there's another generation of gallium arsenide, but then there's another family of thought where actually we get down at what's called the molecular level. If you look at the distances between molecules in matter, it's just so small, it's hard to conceive. That means if we can start making our computing devices down at the molecular level, we can make things go just incredibly fast. So even though Moore's law is sort of tapering off, ultimately we should be able to keep it going faster and faster as we learn new technologies for manufacturing computing type devices. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about these, but I definitely think it's worth reading these because it gives you some of the ideas that are sort of behind the embodiment of the architecture that we're currently doing in the world of microprocessors. Okay, it's just about 11 o'clock. My voice is about dead. If there's anybody that is listening that's got the link and needs to add, please text me and I will get back with you. Or even better, if you would email me, you get back with me, I will send you a permission number to allow you to add the class. I've had several inquiries already. I didn't get the permission numbers. I should have them now. They don't come out till the beginning of class on the first day of the semester. So if you want to add, or if you know somebody that wants to add, if you will email me with a request, I will send you a permission number. Other than that, I'll be back with you at 5 minutes before the hour on Wednesday. We'll talk about our first lab, and I think you'll have fun doing the first lab. It's not difficult, and I think it's sort of cool. All right, see you then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.